It is a quarter of our budget. We have spent $24 trillion since the war on poverty started. Oh, and I had an apartment with a subterranean garage and a fireplace. It had a pool in the back. Are you kidding? Well, the day that my caseworker was supposed to come and make sure no man lived at my house, she told me she wanted to go to lunch with her girlfriend. So if anyone ever asked, just pretend she came by. Are you kidding? This is a fraud, what we're doing in welfare. In fact, less than 20 cents on a dollar actually reaches the household itself in terms of cash benefit, but you get your choice when it comes to where you're going to eat, where you're going, what you're going to spend your food stamps on, where you can go to any doctor you want to, anywhere, anytime with your Medicare. We called it Medi-Cal at that time. Everything, your subsidies are coming out every which way. The only thing you had to do is live by the rules of welfare. Don't work, don't save, don't get married.
According to Star Parker, why is it actually a good thing that President Trump inflames the culture war in America? And how did she turn around her life of drug abuse and dependence on welfare? What's wrong with anti-poverty programs in America? And what solutions does Parker propose to deal with homelessness and generational poverty? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. Today we sit down with Star Parker, the founder and president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, CURE. We talk about her new book, Necessary Noise, How Donald Trump Inflames the Culture War, and why this is good news for America. Star Parker, wonderful to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Star, you have this very, very interesting new book out. I've been enjoying reading it, Necessary Noise. And so, there's a lot of noise. We're here right in DC. Every day there's a new scandal, new drama. Some people are saying, I don't know if the president should be tweeting so much, all this kind of thing. But you're actually saying, the case you make in the book, I think, which is the centerpiece of the book, is that all of this turmoil is actually pretty good for us as a nation. That's right. Tell me more.
Well, that's the subtitle, actually, How Donald Trump Inflames the Culture War and why this is good news for America. We're at a critical crosspoint in our country. I think a lot of people are still not noticing, but they know something's wrong. They don't know what it is, but they know something's wrong. And how I came up with the title Necessary Noise is because after Donald Trump won the election, immediately there was such a disruption in our society, whether it was through the media, here in Washington, D.C. People were very, very upset in the culture. And so I, as a traditional conservative who's been voting Republican for quite some time, started just being dismissive of it. Oh, it's so unnecessary. It's like moving next door to an active train track, and nobody said that the train track was active until after you move in. But over time, you don't hear it anymore. And then all of a sudden, I had an epiphany that no, actually the noise is necessary. These are discussions we've had to have for a long time. We've been putting them off, and we're now at the point where it's going to explode if we do not decide whether we're going to be biblical and free or whether we're going to be secular and statist. That's what's at stake. That's the cultural war, and it's like in the 1850s. We just cannot go on like this anymore, so we're going to have to make a decision. In 2020, we will know.
So biblical and free and secular and statist, very interesting, quite juxtaposed. So is it political correctness that kept these discussions from happening earlier, or what is it?
I think that change is hard. I think that some of what kept the discussions from happening, America's complicit. I talk about in my book, Swamp Noise, that's the first thing I handle, and I talk about Washington, D.C., and where we're looking at now is a $4 trillion spending, but they bring in about $3 trillion. We're looking at 60% of Americans getting more from government than they put in. So Washington has become just a playground for politicians, for legislators, for lawyers, for lobbyists. So when you think about the interest of the country, when you think about the founding of the country, in limited role of government, in people being responsible for their own choices and decisions, we need to address the swamp. We need to say who should be doing what. We look at some of the other areas where we have real tension points. I have a chapter in there called Tolerance Noise. When you think about multiculturalism, it has now evolved into Marxism. So you can say political correctness has some to do with that because others threaten people when they want to speak out and speak the truth. But actually, most people do not like discomfort. And so I think that it's just gone on quite a long time.
So this is very interesting. You're saying that multiculturalism evolved into Marxism. Break that down for me.
Well, when you think about the founding principles of the country, we're talking about eternal truths. I mean, the founders were very clear that you cannot self-govern without some type of moral framework, and you get that moral framework in religion. When you think about what they saw for the role of government, it was to be limited. When you think about what they saw for how we exchange economically, it was a system of capitalism. But when you also think about what they were doing in this brilliance that we call America, why is it so exceptional? It's because it's rooted in a concept of e pluribus unum. Many became one. Many became one as an exceptional country because anybody that wanted to excel in their lives could. If you were in other types of countries and structures, you were born poor, you died poor. But America allowed for all opportunity. So when you think about e pluribus unum and you put it up against what we now have of multiculturalism, no, you can keep all your own cultures, you can do whatever you want to. Well, you have to have some system of order. So what has happened as a result of everybody thinking they can do whatever they want to, it's morphed now into Marxism, where the totalitarian state is replacing religion, our Judeo-Christian heritage, where people learn to self-govern.
Very, very interesting. You use this frog in the pot, with the temperature slowly rising as it's going up to a boil analogy. And this is sort of the conservatives being the frog, I guess, right?
I think the whole society is the frog that I'm talking about there.
Okay.
Because when you think about, in fact, that's the chapter I said, thank you, Barack Obama, because when Barack Obama came into power as a progressive Marxist, people didn't even notice. They just thought they were voting for a first black president. Maybe this is somehow going to alleviate all of the challenges that we've had as a society with the journey through slavery and Jim Crow for African Americans. Maybe this will settle all of that. And they didn't notice that the worldview was in conflict. But this worldview didn't start with Barack Obama. And that's what I'm pointing out in that chapter. We have had these tensions for a long time in our society and actually in the world. Who's going to govern in the public square? So America basically was falling asleep in this little bath of the frog, if you will, thinking that everything was just going to be okay. But they knew deep down it isn't okay. How is it that our children are not even aspiring to the same things that our grandparents wanted? Many, many questions started arising. So yes, I do talk about the frog in the kettle because as Barack Obama came in and turned the heat up to show us what liberal, secular statism looks like, the frog jumped out. At least the conservatives did.
Okay. So so in your recollection, what were these kind of milestones that really show? Obviously, you were one of the people, right, that was shaken?
Well, shaken at what point?
Well, what I'm talking about as the frog that suddenly realizes that the temperature is rising.
Well, no, actually, I've been involved in public policy discussions for 25 years. My story was a little different. I'm like the observer to say, what's wrong with you guys? Don't you see what's happening in the culture? I lived the lie of the left. So it didn't, I already knew what was in store for the rest of us. Because when I came into my early teens, I'd already heard all of the lies that we're hearing in our society today. My problems are somebody else's fault. America's racist, don't mainstream. I'm poor because someone else is wealthy. So I was very wrapped up in just reckless living, because when you don't think that there's a future for you, you just live for the day. And so I got involved very early in criminal activity and drug activity and sexual activity and abortion activity and welfare activity. And it wasn't until a Christian conversion I changed my life. I then became a conservative after going into business. And that's when I started realizing the economic challenges with liberalism. So you fast forward to your question about the frog in the kettle. No, I became very, very involved in public policy because I worked on federal welfare reform. I wanted governmental barriers removed from our poor in particular. We've depended all of our poor on the government and nothing is working in that particular space. My frustration was the rest of America didn't even notice that they not only were complicit in the ghettos that we have today in America and the reckless living that we have and the moral chaos that we have, but they were also finding themselves in that same place because over time, ideas of secular statism are equal opportunity destroyers. They don't care. And so next thing you know, you started seeing breakdown in just what we might call middle America. One example, for instance, out of marriage birth rates. People have spoken about this, and particularly when it comes to the Black community, that when they started this war on poverty, we were looking at out-of-marriage birth rates at about 22%.
Right.
Well, today in Black America, they're 72%. But what a lot of people didn't notice in the great middle class is that out-of-marriage birth rates in the white community at that same point in history in the 60s was 3%, and today it's 30%. So we started to see the same pathologies of dependency and low educational aspiration and crime and more promiscuity and all these other things in our great middle class. No one just connected them to what kind of decisions we were making in terms of public policy.
Right. Actually, when we spoke last time, some months ago, we talked about this, that family is one of the greatest predictors. Like if you're born into an actual family and live in one, that's a huge predictor of success. And if you're not, your odds are really stacked against you. That's
if you know what the definition of family is. That has even changed.
Okay.
We're a new society because of secularism. We can't even decide what a family looks like. So that means generational legacy is being interrupted. And so what does that do when you have policy that says, well, there are no absolutes and anyone can basically do anything that they want to? You end up with other challenges in your society: suicide, depression, poverty that you can't control or break out of. So it's family, let's define it. As husbands married to the mother of the children, then yes, when a husband is married to the mother of the children, you start seeing successful children, and then you start seeing more productive and civil adults.
So you're describing decades of policy that would, basically, entrench poverty, generational poverty, as it's called, and so forth. And this has somehow come to a head now?
Well, it has to a certain extent come to a head because we don't have any money. I mean, the government can't make political promises that they're going to pay off everybody's life and then never do it because after a while you have more people dependent on government than the government takes in. You run into situations of debt like we're in now. We spend over $1 trillion a year that we don't have. So yes, it does entrench it. It was a point in America that if you were struggling through a certain situation, your children fared better than you did. But as marriage started to break down, then yes, that's part of society breaks down too. I cover some of that in my book when I talk about just even these gender wars and the gender noise that we're hearing today.
So tell me this, why is it that with President Donald Trump, or even candidate Donald Trump back in the day, why is it that everything is that much more intense, it seems, right? In the media, in discourse, kind of across the board.
I think because liberals see their power slipping away. I think because it used to be that they controlled all media and information sources, so no one noticed what they were doing to our country. And now we have internet and we have a disruptor who people saw would come to Washington and limit the role of government. I think that, as I discuss in my book in assessing what happened, who are these people that saw that Donald Trump needed to be the president of the country? They came from all types of walks. You saw the Christians who said, enough of this, forcing us to do things we don't want to do and reject our God. You saw people that were very, very concerned about the border saying, enough of this. We have a common culture. And now we're being overrun by people that don't even agree with the values of America. You saw people that were concerned about the military and said, enough of this. How do we have volunteer services to protect our interests, and then we treat them the way that we do through the VA? So there were a lot of different people groups that were really, really upset. I call them just the decent people in quiet America that go to church on Sunday morning, take their kids to school on Monday morning, go to work. And on Saturday, they looked at their country one day and said, what happened? And then they hired somebody that would go do something to stop what was happening. So
is it that all of DC fell asleep at the wheel? How does that work?
Oh no, they didn't fall asleep at the wheel. Washington, D.C.? Oh no, Washington, D.C. is a very well-oiled machine. It needs to be broken. It's not broken for sure. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we're having the discussions we're even having today about impeachment, because Donald Trump came into Washington, D.C. and everything he saw, he's like, well, what do they do over there? And he wanted to make sure that it would work. If he's going to fix America, make America great again, he wanted to know, well, let's look at some places that it's not great. Remember when he even just mused out loud about the Commerce Department and the Labor Department? He said, well, what's the difference between the two? And people at the Commerce and the Labor Department were not real happy. Washington is a bureaucracy, and it's a very wealthy bureaucracy. And they know that it is, and they don't want outsiders changing the way that things are. But we as a country can't go on like this anymore. We are going to be free or we're not. And that's the discussion that's being had. And there are people that have vested interest in us not being free. And that's the noise you hear.
So are you arguing that this unelected bureaucracy in D.C. is kind of, progressively taking more and more power for itself? Is that the case?
They absolutely take more power for themselves. And I don't know that it's just a deliberate, but the way that the budgets are designed, once they have the money, they have to spend it. And it's just a machinery. They're not, the legislators aren't legislating on behalf of the people. They're in business. It's kind of like a union over schools. They don't care anything about the students. They care about the union over the schools and the teachers. So the interest of Washington is Washington, not the average Joe who's sitting home trying to figure out not only how to pay the rent or the mortgage, but also how to pay their tax bill. Yeah, Washington's a problem.
So Star, how does impeachment fit into this then?
Oh, they just want to get rid of this president because he's not finished. Can you imagine 4 more years? Let's look at some of the areas that he's already interrupted, things that he's gotten done. He's even fixing our inner cities. There are people that have vested interest in the inner cities not being fixed. He's fixed Israel. Come on, he moved our embassy. So there are people that are very, very upset that he would pick a winner over a loser country. But this is our friend. These are the most stabilized people in the Middle East. And so he made a statement that we as Americans should have made a long time ago. The Judeo-Christian heritage of our country is very, very important for us to be able to self-govern. And so the list is long for areas where he has been very, very disruptive to the status quo, and all of them are very upset with him.
So let's focus on the inner city. I find that really interesting, and I don't know much about it, frankly. I don't think our viewers might know. How is the administration shaking things up in the inner cities?
Oh, he's done a fantastic job. We can start at the courts, for instance, putting conservatives on the court. And now we have another court decision going up regarding schools, whether money should be able to follow children to schools parents want. And that answer should be yes. But because of unions, the answer is no. Because of the Blaine Amendment, the answer is no. So now a case is going to the court, which will revolutionize education in our poor communities if the court decides that it's not unconstitutional for money to follow children to schools parents want, including if the parents want a religious school. The Inner City Opportunity Zone initiative that the president has put in place. We're talking 8,700 zip codes that are poor. They're just struggling. Nothing works in them. So the president said, well, let's make them work. What's the first thing they need? Well, they need some money. Well, how do you get money there? Well, money's fungible. It creates more of itself. So if you reduce taxation, money will go wherever you reduce taxation. So what they put into the tax bill was an opportunity to put money into any of these 8,700 zip codes, and you won't have to pay a capital gain on it if you leave it there 10 years.
Great incentive.
Yeah, money's like, let's go over there. So now money is moving into these areas. And once people have a little money in their pocket, because the money that moved in their area now is creating jobs, they can think a little bit, they can breathe a little bit, they can pay their bills a little bit better, then they can get their children educated. So and then the community becomes safer because now they have taxes they're paying, so you can get some lights in your community, so it takes the drug culture underground again. So,
That's very interesting. I hadn't, it's obvious now that you mention it, but I hadn't made the obvious connection between inner cities and opportunity zones, but obviously there's a strong overlap.
Well, the thing about the Opportunity Zone Initiative, which is really fascinating, is it's not just inner city. It's just our poor zip codes.
Right.
It was a debate we had about Baltimore. Well, yes, some parts of Baltimore do work, and they work very well. We're talking the parts that don't work, the little zip codes that are rural as well. They're pockets of America that we don't see much unless there's a Katrina. We don't hear from much unless we're talking food stamps and we want to, to make some changes there. These are the folks that just can't seem to break free. And we now have that opportunity. This president has put many initiatives in place that are helping this community. Unemployment levels are extremely low now. Abortion numbers are coming way down. Crime numbers are coming way down. Food stamp numbers are coming way down. So the communities themselves have an opportunity to self-correct. I actually talk in my book about the broken windows concept that Rudy Giuliani had implemented in New York on how you control crime and homelessness in your local communities.
Okay, so expand on that a little more.
Well, what this was is it was a concept from an economist, James Q. Wilson. He's passed on, but and someone else that it's basically if you see a window broken and you leave it that way, someone's going to break another one. And by the time the next window's broken, next thing you know, you got litter. Next thing you know, you have some vagabonds. Next thing you know, that you have fire. Next thing you know, you have anything healthy moving out of the community, and you end up creating a ghetto. So the best thing to do, the broken windows concept, is that you move them along. You have no loitering laws. What has happened in most of our communities today, we see it with everywhere we see homelessness right now. We see it everywhere that we see lawlessness with the gangs, is because the police are ordered to stand down. They're not implementing no loitering laws, and that then creates this tension of an unstable and unhealthy community. Anyone that can then moves, and that then deteriorates everything else. Schools go bad because now you don't have healthy families in the neighborhood at all. Everything in the neighborhood's sick. It's really difficult then to manage that neighborhood.
And now we're flipping that around.
Oh yeah, we're flipping it around. This president has already turned on the engine, and so you're seeing a lot of activity. African American middle class and upper middle class are starting to invest even in their own communities to get this going. And the next thing you know, when you have taxes in a neighborhood, then you have the ability to put in sidewalks and lights. Once you put in street lights, you really put on notice those that are ill in the community, that we're not going to tolerate your misbehaving anymore. Once you do that, business comes back. Business comes back, family comes back. Family comes back, schools get better. And that's the broken windows concept.
Fascinating. You mentioned the issue of homelessness, and I understand that you have a brother who's been homeless for a very long time. And I actually wanted to talk to you a little bit about more about your personal story, because it's quite frankly hard to fathom, looking at you today. that
born again, huh? I know. A lot of people don't believe you can really be born again.
Well, yeah, in America you can transform yourself, right?
Yeah.
And what is your brother's situation, and how have the policies, you've been kind of studying the policies that have affected him and in this, right?
Well, not exactly in that order. What has happened, like most times when you have public policy interest, if a leader says something about a problem, then those that want to fix that problem have an opportunity to start discussing it so that it can get fixed. And so that's what happened with the homeless situation, is the president spoke into it. He went to California, he said, what is wrong with this? You guys are ruining cities that were once pillars are now in ruins. What's going on? So of course, the liberals got all upset there. But at the end of the day, those of us that then work in social reform, I work on anti-poverty. I run a policy institute here in Washington that we work on anti-poverty. Urban Cure. Mm-hmm. So it allowed us opportunity now to say, okay, well then now let's discuss it. Maybe America should discuss it. The first issue is that it's not housing. The problem is not housing. You can try to pretend it's housing and force HUD to spend $4 billion and force the business communities to spend more billions of dollars to build, these structures of low-income housing, but that's not the problem. When we think about who is homeless, you have those that are drug addicted, those that are alcohol, those that are economically distressed, those that have disability, those that have mental challenges. So you can fall in any one of those 5 categories. Mm-hmm. And once you know that those are the categories and you really want to help them, then you help them according to where they fall. Now, the situation with my brother, you asked, did he get caught up in alcohol and drugs? The answer is yes. Does he have mental issues? He probably does now, because over time, when you start really wearing at your brain, it can hurt you mentally. But was there a problem of disability and or economic distress? Not really. He just got caught up in these areas, and because Americans actually think they're helping people by chipping them a nickel and a quarter, just go away, leave me alone, I'm gonna give you a little $1, or even take a little little food basket, they're really just postponing the inevitable. And after a while, that person gets used to living on the street. And so 25 years later, yeah, my brother's just a zombie living on the street for one day Catholic Charities to come and help him.
Wow, I mean, you yourself spent a great number of years in a very difficult situation as well, right? I was reading a little bit about that.
Yeah, but I was just party girl. No, I was, I mean, I've got involved in drugs and all that other stuff, but I had a born again. See, the difference between me and my brothers, people didn't give me little dollars on the street to postpone the inevitable. I went on welfare. So when I was living on welfare, you know, I had my own apartment, and so I had some stability, if you will, to be able to make my right choices. And people weren't just helping me become, you know, more deteriorated and dilapidated the way that they are now with these so-called charity programs to help poor homeless people. So what happened for me was someone confronted me with truth and told me my lifestyle was unacceptable to God. And that's when I started saying, well, maybe I should think about my life and my life choices. I went back to college and got a degree and then started my own business.
But prior to that, what was it that prevented you from change or from changing?
I didn't know that I wanted to change. Why would I want to change?
You had everything you needed?
Do you know what welfare does for people these days?
I don't.
We spend $900 billion a year on anti-poverty programs. It is a quarter of our budget. We have spent $24 trillion since the war on poverty started. Oh, and I had an apartment with a subterranean garage and a fireplace. It had a pool in the back. Are you kidding? Well, the day that my caseworker was supposed to come and make sure no man lived at my house, she told me she wanted to go to lunch with her girlfriend. So if anyone ever asked, just pretend she came by. Are you kidding? This is a fraud, what we're doing in welfare. In fact, less than 20 cents on a dollar actually reaches the household itself in terms of cash benefit, but you get your choice when it comes to where you're going to eat, where you're going, you know, what you're going to spend your food stamps on, where you can go to any doctor you want to, anywhere, anytime with your Medicare. We called it Medi-Cal at that time. Everything, your subsidies are coming out every which way. The only thing you had to do is live by the rules of welfare. Don't work, don't save, don't get married.
Wow.
That's it.
Doesn't sound like the best recipe for a healthy life, though, those rules.
Well, show me one person on the liberal side that actually wants people to live a healthy life. That's why they're so upset with Donald Trump. He actually wants to fix these inner cities. You saw what happened when he mentioned Baltimore. You saw what happened when he told OAC to go up into her own community and fix it. You got everything that you want to do for the rest of the world, but you won't even think about your own community. Her community is dying. If you look at what the people, I looked at the demographics of that little area in New York. She ought to go up there and concentrate on that community. I went into the community of Talib. Go fix your community. That's what you do. That's what legislators are supposed to do. Congress people are voted in to office to be the representative of about 600 to 700,000 people. Not the rest of the country, not 300 million forcing us to do your green stuff, not 300 million forcing us all into a one-size-fits-all Medicare plan that we know is not going to work because it doesn't even work for our seniors or for our poor people when you think of Medi-Cal. So yeah, that's what you have to do. If you're in charge of a community, you can fix that community, and they're not fixing them. They're allowing for that bureaucracy to stay in place, and I just told you the rules, and so of course people aren't getting healthy in those particular areas. But for me, I was able to break through because I got born again. Mm-hmm. And someone told me about the Bible, and I started reading the Bible and found out that actually I should want more. I should do more. I should be more. And in doing that, I started striving for those things. On the other hand, my brother, a couple of years older than me, didn't have that opportunity because so-called benevolent people, liberals, keep giving him money so that he would get worse on the street. They actually don't think there's a problem for people to live on the street. So they keep them living on the street. And next thing you know, you don't have anything healthy enough in you to pull yourself back together.
It's really interesting because it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Charity is supposed to be something, you know, it's a positive thing. We want to offer that to our fellow man, right, so to speak.
But that's not something government should do. Charity is for individuals. That's why the nonprofit world does that work. That's why we should not be doing an anti-poverty program from the federal government, spending $900 billion. Give the people their money back and let them decide which service provider they want to be benevolent to. the ones that want to help the free homeless. You know, homelessness is a really classic case to see where government fails. Because if you go to a homeless shelter that the government controls, it looks like our prison system. The guys are all hanging outside and there's no requirement for them to do anything to better their lives. But if you go to a homeless shelter that's in the nonprofit world, and it's Christian in particular, they really think that there's potential in that person. So they work with them to fix what's broken down to get them back to health. And they're beautiful shelter. They have red, yellow, green systems. They have work that they allow them to do. I mean, it's such a contrast to see the difference there in that. And that's one of the real places that if Americans think that, well, maybe we should be doing something different when it comes to anti-poverty, that would be a classic example of the difference in between government doing it or God doing it.
This is actually one of the, I guess, central themes in the book, at least to me. There's this rise of secularism and kind of attack on faith-oriented organizations and people. And how is that playing out in America in your mind? I mean,
well, we're becoming very chaotic, and I think that's why this door has opened for a totalitarian state. That's why you're actually hearing people saying we should be socialist. They're not learning lessons from other countries that are socialist and are communist. They actually think for some reason it might actually work here. But what has broken down is not just that people are not going to God for their solutions, but organized church has been marginalized. So government has moved into spaces and places that used to be done by people, just free people would fund them, free people would work there, free people would go in when they had a challenge, and all that's been replaced by government with a one-size-fits-all model that doesn't work for anyone. So yes, now we've even gotten to a place where people are attacking religion. The religious institutions are in court because of their belief. And Barack Obama had declared that we were a post-Christian country. And I actually have a whole chapter on that and what that looks like when you say that is not relevant to who we are anymore. Well, according to the founders, we wouldn't be able to survive if we didn't have that. You can't self-govern if you don't have rules to govern. Choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose. And people are now able to make whatever choices that they want to, and then government has become the Band-Aid. We'll just try to fix it, which gets back to our first point about why Washington is just a big cesspool of swamp, is because they're trying to fix things that they cannot fix, because a lot of the decisions they're trying to make are about humanity and human.
So is it sort of, instead of having some common standard of morality, now it's kind of everyone has their own? And that's what they're trying to, is that what you're saying?
Well, you can't have a standard of morality just out in a vacuum. I mean, it has to be from somewhere. Most countries have some type of religious affiliation driving their public square. America's was the Judeo-Christian heritage. It's where we got most of our law, even on the witness stand. I mean, the scripture says that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let the word be established. And that's why we have witnesses to get to the scales of justice. You have judgment, you have mercy, but you've got to have truth somewhere. And someone is going to define truth. If we try to make it up as we go along, then you're going to have politicians defining it or courts defining it. And that's what we have today.
So tell me, you had some clear purpose in writing your book. Tell me briefly.
The reason I wrote the book is because I think that we are at that critical cross point similar to the 1850s when Abraham Lincoln opened the scripture and said, we just can't do this anymore. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was not the first choice of what we would have called conservatives who wanted the country not to be a slave state. And by the time he was elected, he realized that, we're not going to be able to just keep moving around the deck chairs. We've got to solve this big moral question on the table. We can't ignore it any longer. We'd gone 89 years into our existence as a country, still trying to ignore it, still trying to move little things around to make it go away. But we had reached a point that it just wasn't going to be anymore. And as he said, once he read the scripture, a house divided against itself cannot stand. He then said publicly, we can no longer be both. We have to make a decision. Are we going to be slave or are we going to be free? And that's where we are today. I really believe that we as a nation can't do this anymore. We have a big crime against humanity on the table. We've had it since Roe v. Wade, where we kill our offspring, and we just can't go anymore down this road. All of the other challenges in our society, all of our cultural challenges and all of our social challenges and all of our economic challenges and all of our political challenges are rooted in abortion. When you think about the lawless living that comes out of saying that you do not have to organize your sexual impulses within marriage. We now have these safety nets, abortion, pill, this, that, the other. Next thing you know, you have people making choices that land you in a welfare state. When you think about our economic state of affairs, you can't just keep saying that you can do whatever you want to do and force your boss to pay the consequences of it. So they're all rooted there in that one question. And I knew that there was a reason that people elected Donald Trump. I think that that's 63 million people out there that said, we know something's wrong. Our nation's in trouble. And we've not heard anyone that, even politician or not, say that the country's in trouble and then be very deliberate about some of the things that they were going to make sure that they did if they were elected president. We had not heard that. I was 25 years now involved in Washington and politicals and have been in this town through 3 presidents, I guess, and a couple of them, both 2 double terms. No one spoke like this man and then come in and start doing what he said that he was going to do. So I felt that I wanted to put my ideas on the table to say what I thought had happened, why I thought it was important that it happened, and where I believe that we can go from here if he's reelected.
So here's the question. There's a lot of division, and we see it every day. We see it playing out in impeachment, as we discussed. We see it playing out in all sorts of different, smaller milieus, right? People having these discussions, which you argue is good. But the country's, some people say, irrevocably divided. How does the country come back together?
Well, let's hope that we still battle in the voting booth, but I'm not sure that that's true, because what we've seen from the progressive left since Donald Trump is elected, even personally myself, I'm in a security protection program. I've had to move out of my personal house. What we've seen from them on the other side to say we are not going to let any of you rest that do anything publicly in support of Donald Trump, I'm not comfortable what next summer could look like. I'm hoping that we don't go the same route that we did the last time we had a big moral question on the table and end up in a civil war. But I address that in my book because I'm not sure. We went to war over slavery, and as I mentioned, abortion is at root of why the courts are the way that they are. When we saw what they did in the Kavanaugh hearings to try to make sure that he wasn't there, I can just imagine what next year is going to look like as we move into that time that we pull the lever for the next president.
A lot of people don't want to be involved in the conflict, right? They don't want to be. They don't want to have to face this. I've talked to a lot of people that are just like, this is too crazy, And some people say, as I said at the beginning, oh, if only he didn't tweet so much, right?
I'm glad he's tweeting.
Of thing. Well, no,
nobody wants to. It's very uncomfortable. I was Senator McConnell put me on a Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission. And then as a commissioner, we were asked, well, you want to do anything for the country? And so I thought, I'll do something for the country. And so I put on the table that Camp Nelson. I said, why don't we make that, they wanted to become a memorial, a national memorial, instead of just a little bitty place down there in Kentucky. Why? Well, because I thought it fascinating that in Kentucky was a slave state, but it didn't secede from the Union. So it had a bunch of people that we don't want to be involved. We just don't want to be involved. Please just make this a go away. Stop tweeting. But the country needed help. It was dividing. It was really falling apart. And there were many, many Americans that would just make it go away. But in Kentucky, it was a slave state, but it didn't secede. So that means that when emancipation, their slaves were still slaves. The only slaves that were freed were the ones that were in the states that seceded from the Union. So Camp Nelson, the Union Army said, well, I'll tell you what, you join our Union Army and you're free. blacks started coming from everywhere. I mean, next thing you know, they had the house there. So it's a fascinating place to visit. And it is now a federal memorial. Why am I bringing that up? Because it was also the place where when you were called up to serve in the Union Army, if you were already a part of the military, which many were, that you had to make a decision, Union or Confederate. You're in the line, and that's how we all know brother had to fight brother, cousin, because you're in line. Which one? Now you're going to choose a side.
You kind of have to.
Now you have to.
You're just choosing. You're not choosing, you're choosing.
You could have, which one? That uniform or this uniform? And that's what is starting to happen in America. In fact, we see it very clearly in what happened in Virginia. Record numbers. People are not in the middle anymore. It's just you're going to choose a side. Now, does it make a lot of elites uncomfortable? Yeah, it does, because they remember the status quo. They remember the day when Ronald Reagan was president, abortion was new reality, not 70 million dead later. Out-of-marriage birth rates were 18%, right. not 60%, right. And all of the pathology that comes from that. So, yeah, we're at a critical cross point, and you're right. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Nobody wants to, go out to dinner and have to wonder who's cooking your food because they're politically against you. But that's where we are. Better
to confront it now than...
Let's just hope we still battle in the voting booth. We have 12 months to see what's going to happen. I think that on impeachment, a lot of Democrats are very uncomfortable themselves with the intensity of what they're being forced to do, to try to find a reason to kick out a duly elected president. I think the rhetoric we've heard about the 63 million that voted for the man is fascinating, because we're talking about the heartland. We're talking about people, individuals who really get choice to decide. My co-writer on the book, I deliberately chose him because I wanted to get into that mind. What, that middle income, middle age, middle American white male, the married white male that said, enough of this. My country's not my country anymore, and I need somebody that's going to make it make sense again, because we're playing by all of the rules. But what we're seeing today with government and this insistence of others that you're still not doing enough is just not acceptable. And that's where we are. That's what happened. And it's going to be very interesting to see how we get ourselves out of this. Can we really get out of it civilly? I think that it's going to depend. It's the aggression of the left. The Antifa itself has 89 groups, and they're called Indivisible. Yeah, and there's a lot of them. Push of a button and they show up at your home. We'll see. Because we also have a country where those ones that get up and go to church on Sunday morning and go to work on Monday morning, they exercise their Second Amendment rights. So we have over 300 million guns in society too.
It paints kind of a scary picture, actually.
But it's healthy. It's good noise. Mm-hmm. We can't go on anymore like we were. We have to make a decision. Can we do it without war? I hope so. But I don't know. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there when we had our revolution. The people say we're not doing this anymore and we're willing to die for it. I wasn't there when we had our civil war that says we can't do this anymore. I wasn't even involved when we had our civil rights movement, where it was not pretty. People think, oh, well, come on, it wasn't that big a deal. You can over 3,000 people were lynched within a very short period of time. So two presidents, well, one was a president got killed. One was on his way to be president. I mean, Bobby Kennedy was killed 2 months after Dr. King. That's why on his tombstone, they put the poem that blurted up out of Bobby Kennedy when he heard that King had died. This is the same country, and we recovered. So will we recover? Yes. Do we have to go through it? Not really. If those millennials would stop acting like they know more than everybody else, and that anyone that disagrees with them, they're just going to shut them down. This is not a healthy place that we are, that you can't even have a discussion on a college campus, the very place that we're supposed to share ideas. No, I don't know. I wish I could answer. I wish I could be more hopeful. I'm a very optimistic person. But I do believe, like I said in my book, this noise is necessary. We can't go on like this anymore.
Star Parker, such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.